Welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night, dear viewer. Tonight, I will be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. Make sure to leave your feedback on the comments so I can make this the best experience for you. And if you have any stories you would like me to tell, you can send them through the link in the description. Let's begin. Story 1. We first heard that the little boy had last been seen being dragged into an abandoned house on 13th Street at dusk. Suspects were two men. Nobody recognized the child. I walked in with my gun drawn and went through the house, cautiously opening every room. In the living room, I heard a tremendous commotion from the basement. I ran to the door, hesitated, and kicked it in. On the basement floor, one of the men was pinning the child to the ground with a knife in his hand. Despite the kid's small size, maybe 6 years old at best, the kidnapper seemed to be losing the struggle. I shouted to put the weapon down as I scanned for the accomplice that dispatch had warned me about. But I didn't see anyone initially. The kidnapper looked at me briefly, with a look of peaceful sadness across his face. As the child screamed, the man brought the knife down, and I fired 2 shots too late. I radioed dispatch that we needed an ambulance, and I looked around for the other guy, certain I was about to be ambushed. When I found him, sprawled on the floor and behind the stairs, I checked for a pulse and yelled for the newly arrived backup that I was downstairs. Customarily, I checked the kid and the man who attacked him, but they were both gone. These are the hardest, aren't they? One of the imps said. I sighed and nodded. Finishing up my report tonight, I looked through the information that forensics sent, as well as the autopsies. In my career, I've spent a long time puzzling over causes of death, but never have I encountered a man drained entirely of blood, the way the kidnapper behind the stairs had been. More than that, and what still keeps me up at night, is how all that blood ended up in that little boy's stomach. Story 2. Be careful when you gaze into the abyss, for when you do, the abyss also gazes into thee. I don't think I would have remembered Uncle Ben. That's what I'll call him here. Very well, if it wasn't for one thing. I had a lot of relatives visit us while growing up, but I can hardly recall enough of them to count on one hand. The memory of him that stood out was when he, before leaving, handed me something and then drove off. I still remember. It was a $100 bill. I was only 4 at the time. And this was the 80s. Though, as far as I know, I could hand a kind $100 bill even today, and after inflation, they'd be ecstatic. That's the time when even 20 feels like a fortune. My mother kept it for safekeeping, of course. Meaning, I never saw a cent of it. But that left a lasting impression on me. I understood, even then, that my Uncle Ben must have been loaded. I often asked my parents what it was that he did, because I sure wanted to do it as well. The thing is that they never gave me a straight answer. They said that he was a businessman, and other times they would say he was a consultant. Those answers never really satisfied me. Though as I got older, I noticed that my parents didn't seem to be hiding the information. They didn't seem to know very well either. He visited us on and off over the years, every time giving me another extravagant sum of cash or something else valuable. That made me like him quite a bit more than anyone else who visited. And I'd ask why we never went to visit him. My father just said that Uncle Ben liked his privacy. Don't get me wrong though. It wasn't like we grew up poor. It was just that we never had the money to throw around like Uncle Ben did. Fast forward towards the future. I had moved out of my parents' house and hadn't seen Uncle Ben in years. I had started my own job, and things were more or less going smoothly when I got a phone call from the police. Uncle Ben was dead. Now, this was not the first death in the family during my time. Several older aunts and uncles had passed away, though they were always people I'd only have seen once or remotely. This was the first death that hit close to home. Uncle Ben, while not exactly close family, was not a stranger either. I had always up till that point thought of paying him a visit near his isolated home. But things always came up before then. It looked like that ambition would remain unfulfilled. But that wasn't what they had called about. Rather, there was an issue with Uncle Ben's death. He had not died naturally. I went to go see his body. He was nearly unrecognizable. He had decayed what looked like several months. I was told that he had been found that way when he stopped paying his bills. There was an odd peculiarity. His organs were missing. His liver, notably, was nearly completely gone, while there was almost nothing remaining of the spleen or the kidneys. It couldn't have been a disease, but there were no other markings on his body. So it was a complete mystery as to how he had ended up like that, with the coroner saying that he had never seen something like it before in his entire life. I think, though they never told me this, that they thought I might have been involved somehow. Reason likely being that he had left the vast majority of his wealth to me, and it was no small amount. I could have easily retired right then and there. That wasn't all, though. There were quite a things mentioned in his will, which were left at his house. I would have to go there myself to pick them up and sort through them. I quit my job and went for it. His house was really out of the way, I realized, when it took nearly an hour to drive there, and I had seen nothing but greenery all around. The house itself was nice enough, though not quite the mansion I had thought he lived in during my childhood fantasies. I let myself in. The police had done a well enough job of removing the stench of death from the house. I never planned on living there, for the record. I couldn't, not knowing what happened there. I felt like I could get at least a decent price for it, notwithstanding its location. It was still quite messy. It would take a few days for me to pack it all up. But then again, there wasn't really anything much left for me to do. My student loans were paid off, and I had no need for a new job. I slept on the sofa that night. Everything went well, though I did notice a few bites on my skin the next morning. Did this place have bed bugs? Better to sleep in the car then. I started sorting things out. It was rather incredible just how much junk Uncle Ben had accumulated. Some of the things I had no clue as to how valuable they were. They looked like junk, but could have just as well been antiques for all I knew. Upstairs, I found a safe of his. I would have struggled with the combination, but as part of his will, he'd left a note regarding it. There was nothing too valuable inside, just a few papers addressed to me. Jonathan, I have left these here for the day that you may come to inherit what I have. But that isn't limited to just money, Jonathan. I wish for you to inherit my business as well, if you want. It's too precious of a gift to leave lying around after all. Perhaps you will come to judge me harshly for what it is that I do. But from what I've seen of you, Jonathan, you and I are quite alike. I'm sure you'll see the rich benefits that this gift can provide you. I don't really know how it started or where it began. Maybe this house was used for an old US military project and was then abandoned or something along those lines. Though I myself have never been able to find anything regarding the house along those lines. The basement of this house contains a set of stairs that leads into it. Every night, from the period of midnight to 1 a.m. The staircase doesn't lead down into the basement. The next part is a bit hard to explain. Imagine that all the staircases in the world were connected somehow. Kind of how computers are connected via the internet. But not just all the staircases that exist now. Every single staircases that exist now. Every single staircase that has ever existed at some point in time. If you go down the last step, although the staircase looks no different, you will find yourself warped somewhere new. Somewhere you could have never imagined. Of course, there are two things you need to be careful of. You have to go back the same way you came before the clock strikes 1. Take a watch with you. If you fail, you will be stuck wherever you ended up. As long as you are somewhere else, other people can also find themselves back here in the house. The staircase is 2. Way though, as long as you don't go down first. Nothing can come up. And once you've come back, nothing else will come up either. It closes whenever you don't go down there. That is the secret to my fortune. All that you see around you in my house, most of it at least, is stolen. stolen from different people in different periods of time. I've seen the Aztec Empire, the Palace of Ramses II, the ballroom of the Titanic. Do you remember some places can be dangerous though? Take a gun if you must. I suppose you'd call me a thief. I prefer calling myself a collector. As far as I know, there are no drawbacks to taking things. I've never altered history in any way so far as I know. I've also never tried to take a person or animal back. I would advise against it. Aside from that, have fun. I have amassed a massive fortune this way, and I would hate to see that no one used it after my passing. Needless to say, I didn't believe a word of it. This seemed like an elaborate prank set up by him, and I went on with my day. That night, although I slept in my car, I woke up when I heard some strange noises coming from the house. I got up, but when I went in, I saw nothing. The strange rash on my skin got worse, even though I was sleeping in my car. I was beginning to think that this might not be a case of bedbugs after all. Something weird happened the third night as well. I swore I saw a shadow moving around in the house late that night. I was getting rather worried, and my rash was just getting worse. Maybe it was just paranoia. But I decided to give the stairs a try. I'd been avoiding the basement for quite a while now, but I thought it would be worth checking it out. I didn't go down there past midnight though. I was far too chicken for that. I went in the middle of the day, and at first, all I saw were a set of stairs. I went down them. Nothing at all unusual happened. But then I took a look around the basement. I nearly froze. In the middle of the room was a sarcophagus. An old one, like you'd expect to see in a pharaoh's tomb. I went to go approach it, but the moment I tried to, I puked. Just being near the thing made me want to throw up. The next night, I made my resolve to go down there when my uncle had advised me to. As I stepped on that last set of stairs, my surroundings changed. A chilly breeze caught up to me, and the smell of the sea embraced me. I was on a ship, a fairly modern one it seemed, a cruise ship. Needless to say, I freaked out and ran back the way I came. Thankfully, I managed to make my way back. I shut the door to the basement and then collapsed on the sofa. Today, I feel even sicker than I ever have in my whole life. I've started seeing it too. Something in the shadows that seems to be watching me. I think I realize what happened now. My uncle went to go rob an Egyptian tomb. He took the sarcophagus back with him, but he also brought something else back too. A curse. I can feel it. I can feel it gnawing at my body from the inside, slowly devouring me. Soon enough, I'll be an empty husk. It's been 7 days now. I can barely bring myself to stand. I don't think there is a cure for what I have, but I have to try regardless. That thing in the shadows, it seems to be coming closer and closer day by day. I can now make out a pair of glowing red eyes and a row of sharpened teeth. I don't even want to think about what it's going to do to me when it finally materializes. Or maybe it's already doing something to me, gnawing me out from the inside. Not that I can do anything now anyway. I don't even have the strength to drive. The only thing I can think of now is to walk down the stairs. Maybe I'll end up in a better place than this. This is a sort of a last letter to the world. I don't know where I'm going to end up, but I hope that I can get away from this. Story 3. The Blackwood Forest has always been a source of legend in our town. Not for anything good, though. Everyone here fears it. They always remind newcomers to never go into Blackwood Forest. Nobody who enters it ever comes back. At least, that was how things used to be. One of the most famous incidents surrounding the forest occurred around 1989. A family of 6, the Franks, moved into a house not far from the forest. It had an expansive backyard, stretching up until the edge of the dense clusters of trees that make up the boundary of Blackwood Forest. One evening, they decided to eat dinner in their new backyard. They weren't going into the forest, just the fire pit about halfway between their house and the trees. Another family of 3, the Andersons, joined them. At around 8:30, screaming was heard by nearby neighbors. The police were called. When they arrived, they found that the benches, tables, and chairs were soaked in blood. The grass was smeared with it, and a path leading into the forest. There was no sign of either of the families. The police confirmed the blood of 9 individuals was present at the scene. Enough blood was lost to assume the deaths of all 9 individuals. After that day, a massive fence was built around the forest to keep us out or keep other things in. The fence is 11 feet tall and designed to be impossible to climb over, with almost no footholds. A gate is kept locked tight, located at the end of a worn path leading out of the side of town. Nobody goes in, and nothing gets out. Not that anyone knows what took the Franks or Robinsons, except, of course, for me. I've seen what lies beyond the gates of Blackwood Forest. I've seen the beasts that took those families all those years ago. The fence wasn't really necessary, to be perfectly honest. There aren't really any trails to hike through the forest. We don't have many issues with kids doing stupid things like trying to sneak in for fame. Even if we did, the fence keeps them out. Therefore, nobody has any reason to go into the forest. Everyone is too afraid. But although I listened to what everyone always said, never go into Blackwood Forest, I was curious. My morning run took me past the fence and gate, and I would sometimes glance in to see what was in there. I thought it looked like a normal, albeit dark, forest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very off. There weren't many animals, like birds or squirrels, and you couldn't hear the ones that were there very well. It was oddly quiet. At night, no crickets would be heard, no fireflies during the summer. It was oddly devoid of animal life for a dense forest with so many places for a small critter to live or a bird to make a nest. However, besides that, it really didn't seem that dangerous. A few weeks ago, my curiosity got the best of me. I decided to see if there were any openings that I could slip into. Sure enough, on the very far side of the fence, opposite the side with the town, I found a small gap I could squeeze into. I decided that the next morning, I would grab my phone and camera and explore some of the forest close to the fence. I was excited to see what lay within, and wondered about what sort of stuff I might find. After all, nobody ever went in there. The next day came, and after eating breakfast, I jogged to the small opening I'd found the previous day. I had a backpack with some water and food, as well as the camera and phone. I pushed my backpack through first, and then squeezed through the opening. The first thing I noticed upon entering was how dark it was. The trees blocked out much of the sunlight. It was hard to see very much. Thankfully, I could use both my phone's flashlight and the one attached to my camera. As I walked, the quiet of the forest around me felt eerie. There should have been the sounds of animals beginning to wake up and start their day, but instead, there was silence. Every sound I made, like stepping on a tree, quickly was dampened out, as if swallowed whole by the trees. After a few minutes of walking and taking pictures, I came upon a worn path. I was confused, since there was no reason for any path to have been here because nobody had ever lived in the forest. I took another photo and decided to follow the path. After another few minutes of walking, I noticed a clearing with sunlight pouring into it ahead. In the very center of it sat an old, decrepit stone building. Off to the side, there was an old well. The building had a very weathered but readable sign, identifying it as Blackwood Church. I took a photo of the church, and decided to enter. I was very curious, as nobody should have ever lived out here, this deep into the woods. There was a church that had been built as part of the original town, so it didn't make sense for this one to be there. I walked through the place where the doors would have been, had they not rotted off of the hinges. I could see the space around me because of several holes in the roof allowing sunlight in. It seemed like it was once fairly normal, though weeds had sprouted up through the floorboards, which were falling apart. I stepped outside after snapping some photographs. I was going to leave back along the path and get out of the forest. As I walked, I noticed that there seemed to be several old buildings, almost destroyed, spread out on the edges of the clearing. I began to see the old worn paths made of cobblestone and dirt. almost invisible, having been reclaimed by nature. This wasn't just some church. This was an entire town. I was both shocked and excited. I spent the next hour taking photographs of all of the somewhat intact buildings and their rubble counterparts. I spent around an hour exploring the town, exploring a butcher shop, clothes store, and general store. I finally made my way to the path I had come in on. I noticed underneath all of the foliage, there seemed to be a sign. I brushed some of the growth away and read the faded words. Welcome to Blackwood, population 349 CE, 1903. At this point, on top of the confusion, there was a growing feeling of nervousness in my gut. I'd never heard of any town in Blackwood Forest. Our town, Grey Rock Springs, was founded in 1909. I searched the other houses on the outskirts of this ghost town. In one of them, I found the journal of a 19-year-old girl named Ellie. She had moved into the town with her family, the Wilsons, and another one, where they were close friends with, the Millers. They had moved in 1905. The first dozen pages were normal entries about life around the town. Her friend, 19-year-old Janie Miller, and her older brother, 21-year-old Sean Miller. She and Sean were apparently set to get married in a year. Something Ellie wrote almost endlessly about. The 20th entry, dated September 17, 1905, however, was different. The 20th entry said that 7 townsfolk had gone missing suddenly overnight. It read, "Last night 7 of our neighbors vanished. The Smith family and Mr. H. The sheriff doesn't know what happened to them. Their beds appear to have been slept in, and their homes appear normal, but nobody has seen or heard of any of them since 8. 0 last night. I'm getting worried. Some of the other neighbors are talking about dark shadows in the trees, snatching them away. I hope they're all right." After reading this, my anxiety started growing. What could have happened to the people who lived here? I looked at the next entry, 6 days later. It read, "Almost everyone has vanished. The night after the first disappearances, 14 people vanished. The numbers got worse from there. The sheriff, the butcher, the school teacher, all gone. Last night, 34 people, including the Millers, vanished. There are only 115 of us now. Gone. Their beds unkempt. Everything else in place as if they just got up and walked out. It's 7:52 at night, according to my clock. There are things making weird screeches out there. I can see the shadows outside. They're drawing closer. I think I'm going to join Janie and Sean tonight. At least I won't have to live on without my friend and love." Terror was beginning to take hold now. I looked around the room. I realized that it was now noon. I had been reading for so long, I had lost track of time. I got up, grabbed the journal, and ran out of the house, the feeling of being watched nearly overwhelming me. I got to the path I had walked in on. It was then that the screeching and wailing began. It started as an inhuman, deep, gravelly sound, and then cracked and sounded like a dying person giving a final cry for help. Soon, a chorus of these otherworldly howls filled the forest. Terror shot through my body. I felt chills. I turned and scanned my surroundings, searching for the source of the sounds. That was when I saw one of them for the first time. I don't know how to describe them here, but I will do my best to give you an idea of what lurks in those woods. They are tall, around 7 feet, with pure black skin. No light reflects off of any part of them, except for their milky white eyes. Brown veins reach for the center of the eye, where the iris and pupil would have been. Instead, there was just more white. In some places, their flesh clings to their bones as though they have been vacuumed, sealed. In others, the flesh is gone, and only bone remains. Their entire body has pulsating gray veins spiderwebbing from place to place, and their mouths stretch from one side of the head to the other, nearly to the hinges connecting the jaw to the skull. Their teeth are thin as a needle, and they have hundreds of them. One of them was standing close to me, looking at me. It let out a screech, wail, and started to run towards me. I turned and bolted, running towards the church, hoping to escape through a window. Opening. As I reached the church, I turned and glanced back, only to see it standing near the well, not moving. Instead, it was growling at me. As we stared each other down, more of them began to appear. They formed a ring around the church. I was now trapped. Panic began to set in more deeply as I looked through the window. Openings, trying to look for a weakness in the circle I could use to escape. And there was one. Directly behind the church, there was a large opening in the ring of monsters surrounding me. Taking several deep breaths and becoming as calm as I could. Given the circumstances, I took my opportunity and ran. I jumped out the window and sprinting with more force than I have ever used in my life. I made it to the trees, hearing their horrible screech, wails following uncomfortably close behind. I didn't stop, running through the foliage like my life depended on it, which I could tell it did. Most of them remained behind, but a few followed me deeper and deeper into the forest, not letting up. The trees and brush whipped at me, stinging and cutting my skin, but it continued even going faster. I finally stopped when I couldn't hear them behind me anymore. By this point, it was closer to 2:00 p.m. I had run in the opposite direction I'd entered Blackwood from. The adrenaline I'd felt began to wear off, and I wanted to collapse from exhaustion, but I knew those things would keep looking for me until they found me. I spent the rest of the day cautiously searching for the fence, but no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find it. By the time it got dark, I was exhausted. The adrenaline from the whole day had turned into a mix of emotions, namely fear and anxiety. I decided to hide in a tree in the event they found me. As I sat there looking, I began to hear that screeching wail and those deep growls and grunts. They were close. I held my breath as the first one approached. It looked around, peering through the forest, searching for me. I got the feeling it knew I was close. It started to scan some bushes near the tree I was in when it looked up suddenly. I fell from my spot in surprise, hitting the ground hard and with a grunt. It let out a wail and started to approach me. I searched for something to use as a weapon and found a sharp rock. I looked at the large veins covering its chest area. It seemed like the perfect target. It began to run, screeched, and then lunged. I pulled the rock from behind my back and sliced with ferocity, cutting through it like paper. It screamed and shrieked, black ooze shooting out of the wound like a hose until it stopped. The creature let out a final wail before collapsing to the ground. I looked at it. I could hear a sickly breathing coming from the thing. Before it died, I heard a distorted but human voice mutter a weak thank. And then the breathing stopped. I was stunned. I didn't have much time to think about it, because more wails could be heard approaching fast in the distance. I continued to run through the forest, more adrenaline pumping through my veins, fear at the back of my mind. I ran for a long time until I ended up back in that town. I hid in the church, underneath the floorboards. At some point, I fell asleep from exhaustion. The next 6 days were awful. I spent most of them hiding, slowly running through my food and water I had packed. One morning, as I reached the last of my water, I realized I had to escape. Although they searched the forests for me, I thought I could slip past them and make it to the fence. But after a few minutes of preparing, I heard those wails approaching from the distance yet again. I grabbed my backpack and stepped outside again. I looked, seeing the creatures from before step out from the trees. I prepared myself and ran. All of them began to follow me, their screeches cutting through the quiet of the forest and reminding me of how close I was to death. I went down that same worn path, sprinting through the woods. One jumped out in front of me, forcing me to veer off the path and into the forest. I ran, nearly tripping and getting cut on the branches. That was when I saw it. Ahead of me, finally, lay the fence. I took off the backpack as I approached. There was the gap. I was about to escape. They were close now, just a few yards away. I forced the backpack through the opening, forcing myself through it just as they reached the fence. I turned to look back at them, snapping one final photograph. I'm not entirely sure why I did that, but maybe I just wanted proof of the truth, that I wasn't crazy. What I saw was real. I grabbed the backpack and ran back towards town, towards safety, towards home. Their growls and wails fading behind me. I want to say that I'm safe now, that everything is okay, but it isn't. A week ago, I started to hear whispers from my neighbors of wails, screeches, and growls coming from the fence. If anyone looked in the direction the sound was coming from, it stopped. I had to walk past the fence a few days ago, and I heard it. I was all alone. The fence started to rattle as well. I turned to look, but only saw a tall shadow slipping into the darkness of the trees. Last night, 2 people who were walking past the fence vanished. That brings us to today. I know what they want. They are angry. I wasn't supposed to escape. I don't want to do this, but I won't endanger anyone else who lives here. I'll leave the photos, camera, and journal in my desk for safekeeping. That way, people will understand what I saw, at least partially. People will hear the story of the townspeople of Blackwood. That is the reason I'm posting this. So more of you know, I have accepted my fate. After I post this, I will walk to the gate, and I will be taken. I will be taken. I don't know for sure, but I think I will become one of them, cursed to walk Blackwood Forest forever. My consciousness will be left a fragment, my humanity gone as I walk the forest and wail, screech and growl. This is the end for me. If anyone cares, my name is Daniel. I am 29 years old. I live in Grey Rock Springs. If you come here to find me or Blackwood, or those things, or maybe even the pictures and journal, remember one thing. Never go into Blackwood Forest.